Now, I've actually bought a sample of synthetic phenyl ethyl alcohol with me. We can give that to Boris, and perhaps he can demonstrate how easily an adulterated rose oil can be made. Okay, what I'd like Boris to demonstrate is that over there's three kinds of rose. There's some jojoba, and there's the bottle of phenyl ethyl alcohol that I brought from my lab. Basically, Rose Otto, Bulgarian or Turkish, is over. It's just, at the moment, the Bulgarian one is about £5,400 for a kilo. The reason it's so expensive is it needs about 10,000 kilos of roses to make the oil. So, if we look at the wild rose from China, this has been analysed, and it is very, very low in phenyl ethyl alcohol, and it's also low in geraniol. Now, phenyl ethyl alcohol in that bottle, if you're buying that in bulk, it costs about £4 for a kilo. Now, as we see from here, there's over 62% phenyl ethyl alcohol, okay? Now, the wild rose from China is very low in phenyl ethyl alcohol. It's also low in geraniol, which is found in geranium, and it's also a dark orangey red colour. Genuine Rose Otto has a very high wax content, and that's why Boris has got a container of it in warm water, because at room temperature, the wax is in a cool room temperature, it solidifies and you can't work with it. Okay, so if you remember my explanation of the GLC trace, what it measures is volatile compounds. So, if you put something into the column of the GLC machine that is not volatile, it has no way of knowing that it's there. Now, jojoba is actually a liquid wax. It's often called jojoba oil, but it's a liquid wax. And at 6 degrees centigrade, it solidifies. It is also a light yellow color. So if you were to mix maybe 20% of jojoba with the Chinese rose, it will introduce a wax content, which is lacking in the Chinese rose, and it will also make the color lighter and more orangey, so it begins to resemble, you've guessed it, the Rose Otto Bulgarian. Now, there's one other thing wrong. It doesn't have enough geraniol in it. And if we look on here, we can see that, okay, this has only got 2.2% geraniol, which is very low. But there's also just over 10% citronellol. Now, we all know how cheap citronella is. So we could isolate some citronellol from citronella, and we'd get away with adding about 10% of that. We've also got eugenol. Now, eugenol, there is actually quite a lot of eugenol in the Chinese. Eugenol is one of the main constituents in carnation oil, which is also very expensive. But as you know, eugenol is very, very concentrated in clove oil. And if you want to make a really nice carnation, you get your eugenol from clove bud absolute and not the oil. And the GC machine cannot tell whether the eugenol is coming from the flower of the carnation or it's coming from the clove. So it can be very sophisticated, and it can be done in such a way that no one would be able to tell. And this brings me back to the point that the best way of knowing that what you're getting is what you're buying, you have to have trust. Deciding who to trust is much more important than these bits of paper. How, for example, do you know that this is genuinely from Bulgaria? And if I give you this with a bottle of oil, how do you know that this and the oil are the same thing? You don't. Okay, you can test it yourself and see if it comes out. But back to Boris, the jojoba, we're adding wax to the wild rose, and we can add now about 62% of phenyl ethyl alcohol at £4 a kilo. Okay? So what we end up with is a kilo of rose that, if you analyze it, it will produce a profile very similar to that of genuine Rosa Damascena. Okay? So a kilo of that, we could probably knock one of those up for about £100. Okay? So, snappy dresser in his suit could go and, talk the talk. He's got a good deal on this, and he'd maybe off, he knows the producer well, maybe 4,500 a kilo. That's why it's such a good price, but you got to be quick. Bingo.